Welcome to episode 1 of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast by Sierra Club Canada about the environment in Canada. In this episode, we're going to be taking a little bit of a detour and talking actually about an oil and gas project in the United Kingdom, the Rosebank oil project, proposed by Equinor, a Norwegian majority state-owned oil company. It's a project that's remarkably similar to the Bay du Nord oil project, also proposed by Equinor in Canada. And like in Canada, there has been a lot of similar challenges to it, and there are a lot of similar concerns. Today, I'm chatting with Stine Wilhelmsen about the Rosebank project and about the StopRosebank campaign. The StopRosebank campaign is a part of the international Equinor Out campaign, which Sierra Club Canada is also a part of because of our opposition to the Bay du Nord project. And together we've been able to work with groups from Argentina, Brazil, the UK, Norway, and other countries as well as we start to confront what Equinor is doing. And one of the most amazing things about this campaign has been the international solidarity that is generated. And I think you're going to hear today that a lot of the problems that we face when we're fighting back against climate destruction in Canada by companies like Equinor are similar to the problems and the obstacles, but also the sorts of successes and stories that we hear elsewhere in the world. And this will be part of a short series on different members of the Equinor Out campaign that we're going to be inviting to come on the podcast to chat. We also dive into fossil fuel divestment and the lasting impacts of the fossil fuel divestment campaign and how that campaign is still ongoing. We talk about energy bills, an issue that is important in Canada and also in the UK, and how the fossil fuel industry has used that issue to try and sell new projects that really would have very little impact on those energy bills. We also talk about politicians, the media, and how climate reporting takes place and some of the issues that we see consistently in those areas. This podcast is new and will be available soon wherever you get podcasts. So please tune in and stay tuned for future episodes. You can find out more about Sierra Club Canada at sierraclub.ca. You can also take action there on issues by signing petitions, calling into politicians, all sorts of things. We hope you'll check it out. You can also follow us on social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And we hope that you'll search Sierra Club Canada, check us out, enjoy the podcast. Welcome, Stine. How's it going?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining today. I guess just to start off, can you tell me a bit about yourself and what brought you to the Equinor Out campaign, and why are we having this conversation today?
Yeah, of course. Good place to start. So my name is Stine Wilhelmsen. I'm originally from Norway, but been living in the UK for, like 13 years, I think, and been involved in kind of climate campaigning, climate activism for quite a long time. Started out kind of mainly focusing on divestment, so trying to get institutions to remove their investments from fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel projects, and kind of been involved in that space in the UK for quite a long time. And then through that, I came across an organization called Uplift, who is working to stop fossil fuel expansion in the North Sea and also to support a just and rapid transition to renewable energy. And they do that in lots of different ways, but one of those ways is to specifically focus on new fossil fuel projects in the North Sea. And they chose to focus on a project called Rosebank, which was very close to my heart because the company that wants to open up Rosebank is the Norwegian state-owned oil company Equinor. So obviously, right, as a Norwegian living in the UK, I felt kind of personally very motivated to be part of that fight and that struggle to stop Equinor expanding in the British North Sea. I started working with the Stop Rosebank campaign about a year ago now, and through that also then got involved in the Equinor Out global campaign, where the Rosebank campaign is one of the coalition partners.
Right. And so you mentioned that start in divestment actually as something that you began in. I'm kind of curious, before we get into Rosebank, it feels like, so I actually got my partially my start in environmentalism, really, in divestment as well, and it feels like that fossil fuel divestment movement to this day, even though maybe we don't talk about it as much in the media sense, at least, and I'm not as clear on the UK context on that. I can just say in the Canadian context, it's definitely not like page number one most days on the climate movement, but it's amazing the number of things it seems to have led to and brought to. Do you see that connection between those two movements? Or
Yeah, what was the second movement you mentioned? Sorry, you
well,
said.
more between a lot of the modern climate movements,
Oh yeah.
how we're addressing things like whether it's Bay du Nord or Rosebank or any of Equinor's things, or bigger climate fights as well, that are more sort of broad policy based, seem to all kind of I run into a lot of people who were working on divestment originally, so I'm curious sort of if that is the case in the UK as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think when that kind of obviously originated, yeah, in the States and then came to the UK and kind of spread around the world. And I think it really captured people's imagination, I guess. And what it, like personally, what I was really drawn to was the kind of combination of like the moral arguments, but also the economic ones. And I think those two things together was really powerful. And the way that it targeted institutions, at least in the UK, kind of originally targeted institutions that do kind of have the mandate to so we focused my initial campaign was towards my university, so getting their endowment to get away from fossil fuels, and then we kind of moved to like local councils, so local governments, pension funds, but it's also been like obviously the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, so kind of institutions that really their whole kind of essence is protecting the future and investing in like the bright minds of the future, or our kind of local infrastructure and our local services. So I think that kind of moral argument as well was really powerful, and I think it felt really, I think, engaging to be able to like impact something that you were directly involved in, either as a student or as a citizen, but that had such like huge impact, right? Because without the financial means to deliver these projects and without the social license that the continued investments are giving, you're really kind of getting to the root cause of why these fossil fuel projects are allowed to be built and why these fossil fuel companies are able to continue to operate. So yeah, I think the divestment movement was really amazing in that way, because it brought so many things together and had like such a clear kind of ask as well, and so many people felt that they could contribute to it. And then I think it's kind of continued also like as a wave, really. So since I was really involved, we're still seeing like universities, divest, and local campaigns kind of pop up all over the UK and elsewhere as well. So it's kind of really gotten a huge life of its own. And I think every example of a university that divests then means that 3 or 4 or 5 other ones see like, oh, we can also do this. So I think it's a really amazing example of like a really good idea then like a spreading, and kind of getting a life of its own. And some institutions are harder and some institutions are easier, but yeah, I think it will just continue to kind of to spread, I think, which is really exciting. And the amount of money that's also now been like actually taken out is huge. I don't have the number to mind, but it's really, really impressive. So I think that also like tangible impact again is very motivating, and means that people want to continue to join and start local campaigns and kind of contribute in whatever way they have the capacity and time to do.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting because I see the tie-in directly when we talk about Rosebank. And maybe, now we'll just jump into like, I'd be curious to learn a bit more about Rosebank specifically and why, and so maybe, too, you talked about that economic and moral thing, and that comes back for me every time that, we've talked about Rosebank before, obviously. And, that there's that combination of those two arguments that we see, I think, every time we talk about a new fossil fuel project or we talk about a problem with it. So I'm curious, what, just for people who are listening in Canada, what is Rosebank, and what are maybe some of the issues around it that tie into those categories or other ones?
Yeah. So Rosebank is a oil field located about 80 miles or 130 kilometers northwest of the Shetland Islands. So kind of to the north of Scotland, just above the UK for anyone who can think of the map of the UK. And it was discovered quite a while ago, actually, but it's kind of been lying dormant. So a few different companies kind of been looking at it, sniffing if they want to get interested. But it hasn't really kind of, I guess, progressed through the steps to become an actually operational field until Equinor, the Norwegian oil company, together with two other investors. Now there's just one because Equinor bought out Sunco Energy. So it's now Ithaca and Equinor that own it jointly. Equinor owns 80%, Ithaca owns 20%. So they submitted an application last year to the UK government to open up Rosebank. And the reason why stopping Rosebank is so important, like obviously we know that we have room for no new fossil fuel projects anywhere in the world if we're going to keep 1.5 degrees alive. But Rosebank is also a very big field. So it's the biggest undeveloped oil and gas field in the UK. So it contains approximately 500 million barrels of oil equivalent. And if that is burned, it will emit approximately 200 million tons of CO2. And obviously those numbers are really difficult to kind of get our head around. But one way we like to talk about it is that is the same CO2 emissions, or actually a bit more, but pretty much the same CO2 emissions as the annual emissions from the world's 28 low-income countries combined. Okay. So in other words, this one field in the global north will produce as much CO2 emissions as 700 million people in the global south. So the kind of morality or immorality rather of producing this oil and gas and opening up this field is pretty stark. Yeah, and I guess other things to kind of mention about Rosebank is it's in an area that has really rich biodiversity, so really kind of unique and really, really old sponge species, and the pipeline from Rosebank to deliver the gas and the oil is predominantly oil, but some gas as well, will go through a marine protected area, and obviously if there's an oil spill or any accidents, it could have really catastrophic impact. So we've calculated it could actually reach about 16 marine protected areas if there was an oil spill from Rosebank. So yeah, definitely an area that we don't want to threaten in this way. And in terms of like the kind of moral arguments, obviously the UK is going through quite a difficult, very, very difficult economic situation. So loads and loads and loads of people in the UK are really struggling to pay their bills. Energy bills have been soaring, and millions of people are actually having to make the choice between heating and eating. So that's the really real reality and kind of lived experience for lots and lots of households in the UK. And at that time, the UK taxpayer will actually be paying for most of the Rosebank development. So yeah, it's pretty kind of pretty shocking actually. So you have kind of the climate impact, obviously completely going against climate science and everything that the UN and the International Energy Agency keeps warning us about, that we can't have any new oil and gas projects, while they're saying that we want to open up the biggest undeveloped oil field in the UK. We have the marine protection and the biodiversity that will be really threatened, both by the development itself, but also there's always the risk of there being an accident and an oil spill. And then there's the kind of economic argument and the really, putting more burden on UK taxpayers and UK households who are really the opposite of what they need at this moment in time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not the cheapest place to live at the best times in the UK. And I know that there's a lot of issues around that. It's something that we're also seeing here in Canada in terms of, affordability, and that's leading to a lot of, and there has been an attempt here too for the fossil fuel industry to step in and to try and make themselves look like some sort of hero in that. But what we do find repeatedly is that actually, well, they're just taking a bunch of taxpayer money and kind of either leaving with it or developing projects that really don't have much of an economic basis in, even the proposed benefits that they're saying are going to have for somebody. So I'm curious sort of what, how have they been messaging around that? Have they attempted to address any of those things in their messaging? Are they, attempting to sideline those issues completely and just ignore them, or?
Yeah, well, I think the kind of the energy security argument is the strongest one, both from Equinor, but also the UK government. So, obviously they're talking about that we need these projects to deliver energy security, and Russia's invasion of the Ukraine obviously has really helped the oil and gas interests in pushing that narrative, and it's completely ignoring the fact that the majority of the oil from Rosebank will be exported and sold to the highest bidder. So this is not oil that will be given to the UK out of Equinor's good grace. They will be selling it for the highest bidder, and the kind of subsidies and the loopholes in the UK tax system actually means that the UK public will cover 91% of the costs. So yeah, the kind of interest of the oil and gas companies is what's on the UK government and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's. That's what he's mainly caring about, not reducing bills for UK households or improving energy security. The only way to improve energy security is investing in homegrown renewable energy and good green jobs, not allowing Equinor and other oil companies to drill these projects that they receive huge subsidies for, huge tax breaks, and then they sell it to the highest bidder, and the UK have to buy it back. So yeah, completely. I think that narrative coming from governments and coming from oil and gas companies are common around the world, and I think it's getting more and more polarized, I think, in the UK, and I imagine also in Canada and other places, and that's what I guess us as campaigners really have to set the record straight, I think, and counter those arguments, because it's really it's tapping into people's fears, I think, as well. They're scared that the transition will mean that the lights will go off and they'll get even higher bills, which is the last thing that obviously anyone needs at this point. And it's up to us to counter the false arguments coming from the oil and gas industry and from their friends in government, because it's just not true.
Just kind of a blatant dishonesty, or sort of a blatant. It's just amazing to me when political leaders do end up repeating a point from the oil and gas industry that they've clearly heard in a lobbying meeting, but it's how they can bring that forward. Given the fact that it would not take much to actually on your own time research that and figure out that statement is wrong, but yet we hear so many times from politicians, it sounds like in the UK as well as in Canada, a line that basically was given to them by the Pathways Alliance, which in Canada is one of the big lobbying agencies, and there's something fundamentally untrue, something factually incorrect. It's not a question of even ideology, it's just bad information. And yet it gets repeated by somebody who's in a leadership role, or gets repeated in the media as well. We see this, unfortunately, in journalism. There's a lot of great journalists in Canada and in the UK who are covering stories, but I think in part just because of their lack of time to be able to keep up with everything, there are often things that they seem to miss, or they seem to repeat that are just, again, factually wrong. It's funny because 3 times in this interview you said the line, "We don't have any room for new oil and gas projects." And I mean, that's something that, I remember the first research on that was a decade ago. I mean, it's not new. And if we were to see in every article the line, yes, they're proposing this, but the science says that there is no room for that, I feel like people might get that more. It's just amazing to me that we seem to keep repeating that line, but it doesn't seem to sink in sometimes for those leaders that no, that's not a fudgeable thing. That's not something that you can move on. I don't know if you do much of the government relations stuff, or what you hear, but I'm curious of, as an activist, how does that impact your day-to-day, sort of hearing these repeated, again, lies, myths, whatever we want to call them?
Yeah, no, I think, a lot of interesting things to unpick there. No, I think, it's really frustrating, I guess, and disappointing. And I think it happens all over, that the rhetoric from the oil and gas companies comes out of politicians' mouths. And I think we have seen there's been a lot of great investigative journalism and exposés about the close links between oil and gas companies and Equinor specifically, and the UK government, and them having meetings agreeing on how they can convince the UK people about how oil and gas is so good. So I think that is definitely happening. And obviously, like, I'm sure you've heard that Equinor is even part of the Norwegian delegation going to COP28 in Dubai. So like the close links between the oil gas companies and politicians is it's really shocking, and I think it's really important to bring that out in the forefront, and kind of show that to the world. And I think, yeah, like I've been, I guess, campaigning on climate issues for 15 years, and I'm sure people who've been campaigning on it for 50 want to pull their hair out, right, when they hear climate scientists' rhetoric becoming more and more stark, more and more the impacts are already here, and the science is getting more and more scary, and still we're seeing so little, if any, real movement from politicians and people in power, and the oil and gas companies kind of hold on them is just increasing more and more, like COP28 this year will show so clearly. So I think it's frustrating, but I think like a very wise person or many wise people have said, there's no giving up is not an option. So I think we just have to kind of, like, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, I guess. So we just have to bring our best to the table. But I do think, I guess, what is really powerful and very helpful is the kind of breadth of voices who are now getting behind the climate scientists, right? It's not just scientists saying we can't have no more oil and gas. It's the UN, it's the International Energy Agency, it's investors, it's shareholders. It are some governments are saying that very clearly. It's normal people, it's faith leaders, it's school children, it's medics. So I think that I find that very inspiring and very powerful, and it fills me with a lot of hope. I think that kind of, even if we're still not reaching the oil and gas companies, and we're not reaching a lot of politicians, most politicians, like, we are a huge movement and a very diverse movement, and I think it is a matter of time, but obviously that matter of time is very important, because the longer we wait, the worse the consequences will get. But I think it does feel like there's a real watershed moment coming. So it's just how quickly it comes, and that's kind of our job to make sure it comes as quick as possible.
Yeah, and as you say, there is that hope there. And I mean, we've seen this recently. And I think this ties back into like that thing about politicians making decisions or making statements, is that I think often they're kind of like told or assume that, at least in Canadian context, that the majority of Canadians are actually, for oil and gas, or even let's say on a more specific level, the majority of Albertans or the majority of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are in favor of oil and gas because they're oil and gas producing provinces. And we've seen recently actually two polls. The first was on East Coast LNG. Canadians were actually against new LNG facilities, but again, I think a lot of politicians had heard, oh no, this will be popular. The oil and gas industry is lobbying on this. This will be popular. The other thing in the Canadian context is we had a proposed emissions cap that's coming up, and 7 out of 10 Canadians wanted. Majority of Albertans wants an emissions cap. So I think there is a lot of hope, at least, that we're seeing when, as you say, we talk about actually people and what people actually want, not necessarily, what just the framing the oil and gas industry has. I'm curious, you touched on COP28, and, is there a message that you'd like to bring to Equinor, to Norway's leaders at the conference? I assume Norway will have a delegation there. So or maybe to world leaders generally, is there something you'd like to say to them?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, like I mentioned, so this year the Norwegian government is bringing Equinor as part of the official business delegation. So I think that kind of, the close links between politicians and the oil and gas industry, very kind of visual there. Obviously, in Norway, that's not been a secret. Like that's we know that very well. But I think what's really becoming clear to a lot of people is Norway's climate hypocrisy. So I think we've gotten away for a long time to be this kind of climate leader who likes to portray ourselves as the kind of good guys. We have electric cars, and we have a good welfare society, and we like to kind of be the diplomat in the room, I guess, that can bring kind of different stakeholders around the same table. So we've been doing that with one hand, and then on the other hand, we're one of the most aggressive countries in the world when it comes to sanctioning new oil and gas projects at home. So the government this year has approved 19 new oil and gas fields and opened up licenses for 47 new blocks. So kind of very aggressive and huge support for more oil and gas expansion here at home. And then obviously we have a state-owned oil company that is doing the same around the world. So obviously Canada and Bay du Nord, Rosebank in the UK, but there's many others as well, which I'm sure other episodes will dive more into. But Equinor wants to open up projects in Brazil, Argentina, Tanzania, Suriname. The list goes on and on and on. So yeah, that's kind of, so there's the two Norways, I guess, in a way. You have the kind of the good guys who wants to be a climate leader, and our former climate and environment minister, now foreign minister, is actually hosting the deliberations on mitigation at COP28. So, that's the one Norway. And then you have the other Norway, which is the really aggressive oil and gas supporter, both at home and abroad through Equinor. So I think my message, I guess, is for Norway to come clean, both in kind of the abstract way, but also the direct way. So be honest about who we are in this kind of, this huge tension, and kind of accept that we can't be both those things anymore. Like, the world is waking up to it, and Norway needs to wake up to it as well. And then to actually deliver, because we have good climate commitments, we have good climate ambitions, but the time for words is very much over. So now is the time for action. So that's my message to Norway, is basically like, deliver on all the good groundwork that we've done in terms of setting good targets, setting good ambitions, but we have to deliver on it, and stop greenwashing ourselves and spending our energy trying to be this climate leader. Now is the time to actually be that. I think that's my message to Norway. And to Equinor, I think kind of similarly. So it's quite interesting being a Norwegian and then living abroad and working abroad, and seeing the conflict between the Equinor that we are sold at home, which is a broad energy company. They switched their name from Statoil, State Oil, to Equinor, to signal, in their own words, how they were becoming, a broad energy company that was committed to the transition to renewable energy. And they were in this, with us, and they were as impatient and as committed to the struggle as everyone else. And then in the years since they did that, nothing has changed. Like, there's still 99.87% of their energy production is still fossil fuels. So last year they produced 0.13% renewables, and of their investments, only 3% went to renewable, 97% to continuing the fossil fuel era. So yeah, I think similar to Norway, this kind of really tension between like the brand and how we want to be seen, and then what we're actually doing. So I think, again, my message to Equinor is like, you have the capital, you have the knowledge, you have some of the smartest minds in Norway work at Equinor, want to work at Equinor. Like, of all the oil and gas companies, I think we should expect and demand that Norway state-owned one does lead the way, rather than doing exactly the opposite, which they're doing at the moment. So yeah, similar message. I think, be honest, be who you're saying you are, and put your money where your mouth is, really. So I think we'll keep saying that until they listen. I think hopefully they'll start getting the message after some time.
It's one of those things that, again, I could very much just take everything you've said and apply it to Canada. I feel like Canada shows up at COP too, with like this green suit on, and then the rest of the year where, I don't know, giving billions of dollars to a pipeline, or trying to approving new oil projects, including Bay du Nord from Equinor. That does very much feel to me like this. Yeah, there's this disconnect, right? What do you think? Does Equinor have, because we talk about it as formerly Statoil, does it have a potential to have a green future, a real one, if it were to actually change its course and put the effort into it?
I would say yes. I think, obviously, I think it's too easy to say that oil and gas companies will wake up one day and realize that it's urgent and they need to be part of the transition. Like, we need to set real demands. I guess the uniqueness of Equinor is that they are owned by the Norwegian state, majority owned by the Norwegian state, and the Norwegian state have passed a white paper on state-owned companies and the expectation of the state towards those companies, that they need to balance the ability of future generations to meet their needs and financial return. So in a way, like Equinor has the mandate from their owners, their majority owners, which obviously there's a lot the government can do to really turn that mandate and that kind of expectation into like real, really actually putting their foot down. But there is the push from the owners, from the shareholders. And obviously as a company, like that is, a company's reason, raison d'etre, is to deliver on their shareholders. But here you actually have a shareholder who has a real expectation of them to balance those two things. And Equinor also has other non-state shareholders which have been very progressive and have been very impatient when it comes to Equinor's transition plans. So they do have that kind of shareholder backing, and they also have the financial capital, both themselves, but also because they are a state-owned oil company. Like the Norwegian government should be investing in them actually being able to transition by, expanding their renewable department and, in the future just do renewable projects. So they have the kind of, all the things are there for them to really do this. So I think, and I think also a lot of young people who are going to engineering school here in Norway want to be part of a company that are delivering on this transition. And they apply to Equinor with that expectation. And we have seen examples of young people then realizing that that's not where Equinor is at yet, and they leave and they get frustrated. But they do have that support also from their, from their current work base, but also their future work base. So I think there is potential, but I think obviously it needs a huge wake-up call and complete 180 in terms of where they're going, because they are, like I mentioned, nearly 100% still fossil fuels. Pretty much all of their investments are still going to new fossil fuel projects, and a lot of those projects are long-term big projects, that will be producing oil and gas for 20-25 years. So it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy, but I think they have every reason and every opportunity to do it. It's more of a will rather than a way here. I think that's the demand and expectation that we should have as Norwegian people. Like, this is our state-owned company. This is the way, they're representing us abroad. So I think we all need to have, a close think about who we want Equinor to be, and then to push our politicians to actually deliver on that. I think it is possible. I'm hopeful.
Well, and I think there's something encouraging in that you say, young people are at the very least considering, who do I want to work for when I get out of, college, university, whatever, and do I want to work for somebody who's, ethically, and, again, go back to the divestment movement that, both of us were part of. And again, I can't speak to the UK context, but at least in the Canadian context, that was a waking up time for a lot of people who were in university, who were in college, who were, starting to think, well, we need to do something about this. And I have heard now a lot of people who are, going through that now are making that decision. Who do I want to work for? So there's something that has changed, or not so much changed, but maybe gone a lot bigger as a consideration to people, like, where is my future career really going to be? And maybe a bit more criticism of what a company is going to say, in order to try to get you to work for them. On that note too, I'm just curious, a lot of our audience is going to be in Canada, but there must be ways that they can do something about Rosebank. So I just love to know, what can they be doing? What should they be doing to help out?
So in September, the UK government announced that they were giving the green light to Equinor's application to develop Rosebank. This was obviously not the news that we were hoping for, but the movement and the campaign against Rosebank is as strong as ever. So the weekend following the approval, we saw more than 40 protests across the country, and the response and the backlash against the UK government's decision has been really immense. We are definitely continuing the fight and continuing the campaign. We've announced our intention to take the UK government to court over their approval, And yeah, we'll be continuing to fight Rosebank and to fight against Equinor's fossil fuel expansion in the UK, but also alongside allies like yourself, their fossil fuel expansion abroad as well. We would love the support from the Canadian people in this struggle. There's lots of ways that you can support the Rosebank campaign. So we'd encourage people to follow us on social media. Our handle is at StopCambo, and we're on all the channels. We also have a website, which is stoprosebank.org.uk, where you can find lots of ways that you can take action against Rosebank and against Equinor. Lots of them are digital, so you can take them wherever you are. We also have a petition up at the moment, which is targeted at the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, because even though the UK government has approved Rosebank, the Norwegian government and Equinor still have the power to stop this catastrophic project. So we really need as many people as possible to raise their voice and to tell Jonas Gahr Støre that this is not what the world needs, not what the climate needs, and for him to step in and stop this project. So if you want to sign the petition, that would be fantastic. And I also think it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that the more we work together and the more we collaborate across countries, the stronger we are. And that's what's really so fantastic with the Equinor Out coalition, and why we here in the Stop Rosebank campaign find it so inspirational to be part of that, because we're seeing so many examples of how there's links and crossovers between our campaigns, and how we can, by sharing knowledge and by amplifying each other's campaigns, we can really support each other and be stronger together. So really encourage people to get involved in the Bay du Nord campaign in Canada and where you live, and kind of take action on Equinor in Canada. By doing that, you're also helping us taking action against Equinor in the UK and in Norway and in Brazil and in Argentina and all over the world. So yeah, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking about Stop Rosebank to you all, and hope you find us on social media and online.
Stine, thank you very much for joining me today, and best of luck with the campaign. For those of you listening, there's going to be a link to that petition underneath or somewhere around this podcast, so you can sign it, and there'll be links to some of the sources you mentioned as well. Thank you again.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today to the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. Fairly self-explanatory. This was episode 1. We may be taking a break for the rest of the year and coming back to you in the new year. It's still waiting to see. But in the meantime, as mentioned before, check us out at sierraclub.ca. Be sure to check us out on social media. Be sure to take action. We have lots of petitions and actions for you to take. And be sure to check out all of the links below to the Stop Rosebank campaign, so that you can take action there and show solidarity with our friends in the United Kingdom. Thank you again to Stine Wilhelmsen for joining me today, and thank you to you. Tune in next time.